Welcome to today's free webinar powered by Citrix GoToWebinar. Can you grow profitable revenue with fewer salespeople? I'm Tennille Dorr, the Senior Marketing Specialist here at Citrix, and I'll be your moderator today. When you consider that almost 75% of buyers choose the supplier who first provided insight into their pain point, most would argue that this is probably achieved through by means of a well-experienced sales team that can establish connection, provide value, and build trust with prospective customers. So I guess that means that businesses now need to ensure that their sales team is well qualified and perhaps even well paid in order to compete effectively. But is this really the case? This webinar explores the trends in business-to-business selling and answers the provocative question of whether sales revenue can be increased while at the same time reducing the number of salespeople employed. So with the housekeeping out of the way, it's time to introduce our guest speaker, Tony Hughes. Tony Hughes is a best-selling author and teaches sales leadership as part of the MBA program at the University of Technology, Sydney. He is ranked as the #1 influencer for professional selling in Asia Pacific by the Top Sales magazine. And his LinkedIn blog is widely read with 50,000 followers. Tony speaks internationally and writes for publications globally on the topic of modernized selling and sales leadership. With 3 decades of sales and business experience in roles including sales director for public companies and managing director leading the Asia Pacific region for multinationals, Tony brings real-world experience to the topic of how to drive profitable revenue in highly competitive markets. In this webinar, Tony asks and answers the question of whether companies can drive more profitable revenue with fewer salespeople. So with that, I'll hand over to Tony, and welcome Tony for joining us.
Hey Tennille, thanks for introducing me. This is actually the second webinar that I've got the privilege of doing for Citrix. Really excited about the information I'm going to share with you today. I just want to say up front that although I've posed today's webinar in terms of a question, is it possible to drive more profitable revenue with fewer salespeople? In my view, it really is a rhetorical question. The reality is today is that every organization has to figure out actually how to do that, and I'm just going to talk about what's going on to all businesses out there, whether they're business to consumer or business to business. And at the end of the webinar today, I'm going to make 3 recommendations. I'm going to give you some tangible, actionable takeaways that I think you can look at within your own organization. Let me just start out with a very short true story. You're actually looking at an illustration of an aeroplane that I owned years ago. And the reason I'm showing you this is I just want to highlight that in everything in life, whether it's our family, whether it's business, there's things going on that are often hard to see, that aren't necessarily obvious. And I learned a really important lesson in my life when I learned to fly. I managed to get my private flying license, the right to go solo in record time in the flying club that I was with, just with 6 hours of time with an instructor. But before he let me loose to go on my own on my first solo circuit, he asked me a really important question, and he said to me, what's the definition of confidence? Now I thought it was a bit of a strange question, and I chewed it over and I said, well, I think confidence is where skill and experience comes together. And he just shook his head quite laconically and said to me, no, confidence is the feeling you usually have just before you understand the situation. And I thought about that, and it was dead true. So I learned to fly always being positively paranoid, always thinking what could possibly go wrong and try and prepare for that contingency. So the example here was I actually mismanaged a landing at a particular airfield and smashed my timber propeller. I had the propeller repaired, but what I didn't know is I'd put a fatigue fracture in one of the bolts in the drive system of the aircraft. And then about 2 months later, I was flying above a very big pine forest and I lost my engine. So the revs went off the end of the tacho. The propeller was still spinning, but the engine and propeller weren't connected anymore. But because I flew always thinking, if I lost my engine, where will I land? Because an aeroplane will fly perfectly well without an engine. It just becomes a glider. I was able to just make it out of the forest. That's those pine trees that you can see behind. And although I wrote the aircraft off, I actually managed to walk away. So I've applied that same principle in business. I've always said to myself, you know, my competitors are in their boardroom plotting and scheming to go and take my clients away from me. there's things going on inside my largest customers that I need to be aware of. And as an example of that, every single one of our large clients, every one of them is needing to get greater value from fewer supplier relationships. And if we're not the one that gets on the front foot and goes and talks to them about them getting greater value from their relationship with us, it's highly probable that our competitor will go and do that. So let me talk about some of the things that I think are going on that aren't necessarily obvious, like the example of the engine in my aeroplane. This slide here is on the left is the cover of a magazine in the USA where I wrote an article for that magazine about a year ago, and it's really a piece of satire. I thought it was quite funny. The owner and editor of the magazine thought it was quite funny. The article got good feedback, but what amazed me was how many people thought that the article was actually serious rather than a piece of satire. And I talked about the fact that the unintended consequences of social media and the changes in the way that buyers are going to market are having a huge impact and is going to cause an apocalyptic extinction of salespeople. Now, interestingly, last year, Andy Hoare from Forrester, who I respect greatly, and Forrester is an excellent research organization, they surveyed 236 buying organizations to understand their buying behaviors and how they were changing. And the conclusion that Forrester made from their research was that in the USA alone, between 2016 through to 2020, so that's about a 4-year period, that more than 1 million business-to-business salespeople will actually lose their roles. And that equated to about 22% of B2B salespeople in the USA. And that research would absolutely apply, I believe, to every other Western market and probably most other markets as well. They also identified the fact that those businesses who get on the front foot and really think about customer experience, aligning to buyer journey, modernizing the way they sell, and help people to transact easily in a way that works for the buyer, not only do they increase sales, but what they also do is they drive down the cost of sale. And you can see there that the cost of selling in a business-to-business context, the difference between having people do the selling and selling online, it goes down from $24.50 to just $1.50. When you dig deeper into Andy's research and you look at what categories of salespeople are going to be most affected, the thing that this slide is showing is that it's the strategic or the consultative type of seller that still has an assured career. Anybody in that bottom left part of the quadrant that's really just helping customers transact. If you're in the bottom right hand of the quadrant, if you're just helping your client navigate your organization, just really managing a relationship. And their relationships are very important in business. People have always bought from those they know, like, and trust. But I certainly believe, and I'm not alone, corporate executive board research supports this as well, is that relationships alone are not enough today. We need to be very good at creating value. And one of the reasons that so many salespeople will lose their roles isn't because they're not good at what they do. It's just the reality that they're going to fail to create the necessary level of value that actually funds their existence. So people just helping clients transact, about a third of those will be gone, and you can see those other statistics. And that illustration there is actually out of my book I published a few years ago, and I've overlaid Andy's terminology in blue there with also the statistics. So you can certainly see that the impact is dramatic. The other reason that we need to think about the way that we're selling as organizations is that running a direct sales force, and I would even argue an inside sales force that's on the phone, is certainly expensive. And these statistics are quite staggering. So according to corporate executive board research a few years ago, as part of them releasing the book, The Challenger Sale, they found that 40%, 4 out of 10 business-to-business salespeople miss their number. The TAS group, which provide excellent software that integrates, for example, with Salesforce for actually managing the complex sale, their primary market is people involved in complex, long technology sales is their primary market. They found that it was 2/3 of the salespeople in organizations are missing their numbers. And when you have a look at the high cost of sale, that really is a staggering amount of money. And I believe it can be better applied to modernizing the way that organizations sell. So I believe companies need to, in essence, have fewer salespeople, but of higher caliber that are much better equipped to be able to go to market. One of the recommendations I'll make at the end of this is going to go into a little more detail about that. So at one end of the spectrum there, you've got the fact that in business-to-business selling, many people miss their number and there's a very high cost associated with that. At the other end of the spectrum, when organizations have gone and surveyed buyers and asked them about their experience in dealing with sellers, with salespeople and selling organizations, the thing that's interesting here is that 85% of the time, the seller fails to meet the expectation of the buyer. And what we know today increasingly is that buyers expect the person coming to see them, they expect them to have insights. The era of turning up to your client and expecting them to educate you about their business is really gone. We need to arrive when we have a meeting with the client, having done our research, and we need to have a hypothesis of value. We need to say that, you know, based on our knowledge of the industry, working with other clients that are similar to them, these are the kinds of problems and issues that we are seeing, and then test whether that's the case in their organization. We can't turn up and say, tell me about your organization. We need to arrive with insight. Now, the interesting thing here is that I believe if you got all the salespeople in the world and lined them up and stuck your finger in the chest with every one of them one by one and said, do you competitively differentiate yourself and your employer or the product or service you represent when you go and see clients? They would all say, absolutely yes, that's what I get paid to do. But the reality is, again, in this research from Corporate Executive Board, 86% of sellers fail to differentiate. And competitive differentiation is incredibly important. It's not that as sellers we want to focus on the competition, but we need to understand that buyers make a buying decision comparatively. They're looking for best value and lowest risk as they make their decisions. Now, this 85% number is quite interesting in that it's the same percentage that came up in Gartner research, another excellent research organization. And what they believe is that by 2020, so just within 4.5 years basically from now, 85% of business-to-business transactions will be executed without any human interaction. Now, that 85% number does not apply to the process of winning new business or on acquiring new named accounts for your organization, but it certainly applies for existing clients transacting. So obviously there's a problem. Let me just talk about the concept of disruption. And I know disruption is kind of the new black. I was actually having dinner last night with the CEO of one of my clients, and he's been doing a lot of reading and researching about disruption, and in the context of talking to venture capitalists actually, and he said to me that he believes that there's going to be a disruption bubble that's about to burst. So this whole buzzword of disruption is like the .com era. So if we call it disruptive, people who want to invest in it, it's going to be great. But in many ways, disruption has always been going on. So I'll just talk about that for a few minutes. So I'm going to show you some examples of what drives disruption across industry sectors. But this father and son combination here, Richard and Daniel, you can see on the cover of this book, published this book about a year ago, and they talk about what's happening to the professions. Because it's easy for us to have a look at things like the toll booth operator on a bridge or a freeway, or the person that used to work the elevator in a store, and how those roles and people are all gone. But if I'm a knowledge worker, if I have lots of knowledge, I'll be safe. Nothing could be further from the truth. Knowledge workers are absolutely at risk. If you have a look at that list on the right, I've been doing some work, for example, in the legal profession. A lot of what the legal profession has done in the past and where they've made their money is looking at precedents, for example. So a client will come to them and say, we've got this situation, we're not sure whether we should defend or litigate. You know, what's your advice to us? There's a big cost in us either prosecuting or defending this matter. What are our chances of success? So they've done a whole lot of research and have a look at precedents. The reality today is that there's very clever search algorithms that enable you to go and determine precedents without having an army of people doing the research. If you're doing mergers and acquisitions, you can put up deal rooms online. I know that Citrix, for example, themselves have got excellent solutions for being able to manage teams remotely and share documents and collaborate really well. So, you don't even need people in country. You can have a lot of these far more cost-effective people offshore in the Philippines or in India or in some other job market that can be looking at contracts and doing due diligence for a company that's managing a merger or acquisition. So disruption is very real for the professions. It's a big mistake to think that because I have good relationships with people, because I'm a knowledge worker, I'm safe. Knowledge workers are not safe. So let me just talk about the things that really drive disruption of people's careers and jobs and businesses. Now, the first issue is commoditization. In post-World War II, the USA taught Japan about quality. Deming went over there, did a spectacular job, and it took quite a while, but within a period of time, Japan became the best quality manufacturer, eventually along with Germany, of products in the world. Germany is good for innovating, and Japan was very good for refining and quality. And we've looked at other markets, and we've assumed that the fact that we do quality and there's a big gap between us and them, that we're safe. But the reality for the USA is one of their most successful exports in the last few decades have been their manufacturing jobs overseas, which is not really an export at all. It's been hugely damaging to their economy. The same thing's happened here in Australia where I live. But here's the reality. There's 5 of those ships. They travel fast enough to water ski behind. They're bigger than an aircraft carrier. They only have 13 crew. They carry 18,000 containers over 1,300 feet long, but they cross the Pacific in just 5 days. And right now there's 5 of those. There's many other ships as well, but there's 5 of that exact type of ship. And when they get to the USA, the process of unloading that container ship only takes 11 hours. Just 11 hours to unload, and it's all automated. So, people that drove those cranes at one stage were highly paid workers in a highly unionized environment. They had specialist skills. If they made a mistake, it could cost lives and cause huge financial damage. It's all been automated. So we know that automation can absolutely drive people losing their roles. But interestingly, in this example, those ships go back to China completely empty. And just having a massive ocean between us or tariff protection, those things over time go away. And markets like Korea have dramatically improved their quality, and China's improved their quality. We all know that things like fork truck drivers and warehouse picking personnel in logistics operations have lost their roles. In Australia, our mining industry has been a huge part of our economy for a long time, and people would make more than $100,000 a year driving a mining truck. Increasingly, those trucks are automated. You may think that if you do something like bricklaying and put up walls or pave streets or sidewalks that you're okay. They've got machines where you can just throw bricks in these things and they lay them far more cost effectively. Another thing that drives disruption is globalization, the fact that you can easily now, with voice over IP and technology, you can move call centers overseas to much lower cost markets. And people are increasingly outsourcing all of their back office and accounts payable operations. The Uber example has been done to death, but the reason I put this up here is I actually went through the process myself of becoming an Uber driver. Now, I've never actually taken a passenger on a ride, but I went through the process of becoming fully certified, getting my app loaded. I've got some issues with the way that Uber operate. I actually regard them as an illegal operator, and they truly are a taxi service, not a ride-sharing service. But the ability that they've got to create incredible customer experience, for want of a better term, or user experience, I think is really unrivaled. So, whether you're the person wanting the ride or whether you're wanting the driver, whether you're on web, whether you're using the web or whether you're online, the way they run the process is spectacular. And they can apply their knowledge to do other things. So they're in the process now of disrupting the courier industry. They're in the process of delivering food. So in one market, the regulators closed them down. They said, you are an illegal taxi operator, you're not a ride-sharing service, and they stopped them operating. Uber very quickly pivoted and became a fast food delivery business. So that's another thing that they're doing globally. But just maybe to talk about some other things that I think really hammer this point home is it's both industries as well as individual people that become disrupted. And if you think there's probably nothing that requires a higher level of skill than flying a helicopter. So I can fly a light aircraft. I've had a go at flying a helicopter, and my goodness, it's difficult. But you think a helicopter pilot would be safe. But both helicopter pilots and helicopter manufacturers are being disrupted by this. So the ability to use drones to do very high quality photography, was changing that market. There was a company called Robinson introduced a helicopter called the Robinson R22 probably about 25 years ago, which was a lower cost, much smaller helicopter, ideal for aerial photography. You could do it far more cost effectively. And they started to disrupt manufacturers like Bell with their Jet Ranger. This is going to that next level again. So even helicopter pilots aren't safe. If we have a look at the attitude that most salespeople take, is that they believe that the fact that they build good relationships and the fact that they can connect people together is what will assure them of their role. Now, I don't know whether you know what this photo is, but this is actually one of the very early switch rooms. And these were schoolboys working part-time, connecting calls. Now, the reason that there's a gentleman sitting behind them in a table is they had a massive problem with this business model, and that is that the schoolboys would make very inappropriate comments and use bad language. They ended up moving them on and moving to ladies who could be friendly, build a relationship, and do it far more effectively. But we all know that that kind of role disappeared, and the reason that it disappeared is we didn't need people to actually just connect people together. So this slide here is who moved my value quadrant. So this is a similar version to that value quadrant I was showing before. My first ever job in professional selling occurred when I came back from the USA when I was 25, so that's about 27 years ago. And I decided to get into professional sales. I'd never worked in sales. I got a job in the radio paging industry. And basically, for those that are too young to know what radio paging is, so before phones and SMS messaging, technology came out where you could send an 80-character alphanumeric message to somebody in the field, same kind of message length as Twitter today. Twitter is actually a derivation of paging in many ways. So in the olden days, people would use a client's phone or stop at a payphone to phone into the office to check for leads and get their messages. And when I got into that role, the company I worked for in Australia had well over 100 sales reps. We all drove company cars. The successful people could make a six-figure income, if you could believe this, more than 25 years ago. So as much money as doctors, dentists, lawyers, and accountants. And we were needed because the market didn't really understand what paging did, and we could competitively differentiate because in radio paging there were different models of pages, there were service options. Every company had their transmission towers in different locations, and you could transmit the message, but you didn't know whether it was received. So it was important for the client to go with a company that provided good coverage, and we'd provide that information and help the customer navigate through that process. But over time, like everything, whether it's the fax machine or many other things, everything drifts toward being a commodity. High-value solutions over time just drift toward being a commodity. Now, that's not dramatic disruption. It's really just a drift toward commoditization, but it has the same impact as disruption. So the high-value solutions piece becomes much smaller. And the biggest trap that I see as I work with clients, the biggest trap that I see them falling into is as things drift toward being a commodity, as their competitors use technology better than them to provide far better customer experience to go and take their clients away, they continue to use an expensive field force rather than invest the money in modernizing the way they deliver customer experience. So hunters and farmers, that terminology for salespeople, if they get caught in the transactional commodity place, the problem is they end up just not being able to get funded, and it's unprofitable for the company that's doing the selling. So my view is, if you've got a product or service that is drifting toward commoditization, obviously we want to keep adding value as much as we can, but sometimes we just have to face the truth. We need to think about how can we apply our capital to go and drive revenue in other ways. Now, this is a pretty provocative suggestion I'm going to make, but I think that what CEOs need to do is that they need to go and give their VP of marketing, their marketing director, a sales quota. They need to take away the commodity style of products and service from the field sales team and go and give them to the marketing manager and say, you go figure out how you're going to go and sell this. And and as you map buyer's journey, if there's a field salesperson needed, then that's great. We'll introduce them then, but you work out how you go and drive profitable revenue through really thinking about customer experience. So consider giving the marketing people a quota. Now, for those who want to avoid being disrupted in professional sales, so both sales managers and salespeople, I want to ask you a really important question. So, what value do you create that makes you indispensable? And very few people that I talk to have a good answer to that. It's one thing to have a whole lot of bravado and courage, and you go and work hard and you're willing to go and challenge people, right? But if you're locked in a room with a 400-pound gorilla, it's very hard to go and win that battle. So the thing I believe that's important is that salespeople who think my career is absolutely okay because I'm great with relationships, and it's people that buy from people, and it's salespeople that go and win new accounts. There's a degree of truth to that, but the reality today is that relationships alone are not enough. So let me talk about the three things that I think you need on top of relationships, or you need to use these things as a way of leveraging relationships. So the first high performance factor, the first way of assuring your sales career to make sure that you prosper, is to learn how to lead with insight. The thing I see all the time in the marketplace is sales teams who talk about who they are, what they do, and how they do it, instead of leading with why a conversation should matter to the potential buyer. So we really need to learn to talk the language of leaders, and I'll talk about that in a second. So the first thing is we need to learn with insight. Clients can jump online and do their research, and usually they have. 75% of the time that a buyer meets with us, they've already done their research online about us. They've had a look at our LinkedIn profile, usually, and often they've gone and have had a look at our website. And if we just turn up wanting to give them information about our company, we're telling them something that they already know, and they don't want us to turn up and say, tell us about your company, Mr. Customer. The second thing is we need to become masterful at building trust. So people have always bought from those they know, like, and trust, and they do business with brands that they trust. So trust continues to be really important, but the reality is we can start the process of building trust before we ever meet the person face to face. And again, LinkedIn is a great place to do that. We need to take our LinkedIn profiles and stop using them as an online CV and start using our LinkedIn profile as a personal microsite for our brand, for our personal brand. We need to start to show our values and what we do for our clients rather than our job description and all of the success that we've had. The third thing is we need to become really good at creating value. So the way we create value is we do our research and we learn to talk and we focus on the language of leaders. So all leaders care about, genuine leaders, is they care about delivering outcomes, they care about managing risk, and they care about the numbers. So they care about the business case for making that investment, and they care about delivering financial results. So salespeople are wired to think that the language of sales, the language of persuasion is all of their words, right? But we need to get really good at focusing on outcomes, managing risk, and delivering results. It's an incredibly important thing for us to do. So with all of that, what I'd like to do is to talk about three things that I think you should focus on. To avoid being disrupted is one thing, but to be able to drive greater revenue with fewer salespeople. And the fewer salespeople, I don't think is a decision that most businesses get to make. I think it's something that's being forced upon them. Just yesterday here in Sydney, I did a keynote in a boardroom overlooking Sydney Harbour for the heads of sales of large multinational companies. And one of the VPs of sales that was there was talking with me over a coffee and mentioned how one of their competitors had just fired half of their salespeople here in the Australian market. And this is not uncommon. Just last week, there's a VP of sales I mentor in New York. We have a weekly Skype call. He was saying in his office, 5 people, so him and 5 other people that he manages, they just laid off half of the people, and they're reapplying that money to have more senior salespeople and leverage technology far more effectively. So they're making investments in technology. So they're investing the same kind of money in going and delivering the sales result, but they want fewer salespeople that are much better at what they do, and they want to make investments in technology to go and deliver the revenue result as well. So the first thing I'm going to recommend is that salespeople need to become micro-marketers. Now, this is controversial in the sense that many employers believe that they do not want their salespeople building their own brand. They only want the salespeople promoting the brand of the employer. They also don't want salespeople writing anything. They're concerned about what they would say in social. But the reality is that corporate brands are diminishing at the rate of 6% per annum, and personal brands are increasing at the rate of 12%. So because people buy from those they know, like, and trust, and then they'll do business with the brand that's behind that person often. So in an outbound business development role, that's certainly how it works. It's really important that salespeople get good at building their own pipeline and that they no longer depend on marketing to do this. Now, old dogs can learn new tricks. Certainly for myself, 15 months ago, I was challenged by one of my clients to get active in social and really embrace social. And in just a 15-month period, I've gone from 1,400 people following me in LinkedIn to approximately 50,000 people. And I don't have to do business development anymore. I've got business coming to me. I've been working with clients to help them modernize the way that they sell. So to use LinkedIn, I'll talk about LinkedIn a little bit more in a moment. Now, I'm obviously a publisher and I'm building audience following. A salesperson doesn't really have the same goal. So what they want to do is they want to set the agenda around value and really establish their credentials and start to build trust online so that when someone has a look at them, what the person sees really supports what they're trying to do as a salesperson. It's been said that someone will form an opinion about you within 12 to 20 seconds, when they meet you. The truth is that opinion is formed usually just purely on face and body language in under a second. And the same is true when they look at you on LinkedIn. So make sure you've got a great business, friendly, smiling LinkedIn shot within your profile. So what salespeople can do is they, in terms of being a micro-marketer, is they can think about the buyer journey. They can think, well, what are the trigger events that go on in my prospect's world that would cause them to welcome a conversation? And at what stage in them considering change or researching the market can I go and engage much earlier? Because being strategic is really defined by engaging early at senior levels, setting an agenda and a positive bias that makes it hard for your competitors later, and making sure that you're embedded in a very strong and compelling business case. So, they're really the foundational things of being strategic, and using social to monitor for changes. So as an example, people changing in senior roles in potential customer organizations can be a trigger event. Often new people come in because they're driving change. So what we want to do is to move away from this traditional model of cold calls and blasting and spamming people, this interrupt and push model, to instead attract and engage. And for those in marketing that are on this webinar, I think marketing needs to do the same thing. We need to think about, what do my clients or potential clients look for online before they would ever know to look for our brand, and we need to build content around that. I talked about that in detail in the last webinar with Citrix. So we need to move away from that interrupt and push model to really have a model where we've modernized selling. And social media is misunderstood by most people, but it's really about attracting and engaging and getting massive leverage in what we're doing. So this is my definition for social selling. Social selling is not a great term. I struggle to think, what else to call it. Maybe we should just call it modernized selling, but it's the strategy and process for building a high quality network online that increases our reach and enables us to accelerate the speed of business. So the whole idea is we improve the efficiency of client acquisition, and we achieve those results with a really strong personal brand, doing social monitoring. Marketing departments have usually got tools that can listen for trigger events and for brands in the marketplace, so we can tune those tools to help us identify opportunities. And good salespeople have always researched, before they go and engage, and they've always collaborated well. But the publishing piece is really, really important as well. Let me just talk about LinkedIn, and the reason I do is that if you're in business-to-business selling, I would say to you that at least 90% of the people that you will ever need to get to are there in LinkedIn. There's about 415 million members of LinkedIn. In Australia, it's about 8 million. It's a massively powerful platform, but not just for engaging with potential clients. If you're in small business and you're wanting to generate media coverage, all of the journalists that you would ever want to get to are sitting there in LinkedIn. If you're looking to find partnerships, in your own country or overseas, and going to market through channels, you can find those people in LinkedIn. If you're wanting to recruit the best staff and avoid paying recruitment costs, you can use LinkedIn. So it's an incredibly powerful tool. And there's a research organization in the States called C9 that did some research into LinkedIn and the performance impact it has for those that use it well. And what they did is they got the leader tables from enterprise organizations, so the performance table against Quota, highest performers down to lowest. And then they compared that with people's LinkedIn social selling index score. So I won't explain the social selling index, but it's an algorithm that LinkedIn have, and every person with a LinkedIn account can get their SSI score. But it shows the degree to which they're building brand, they're establishing connections with people, they're leading with insight. It gives them a score across it. And C9 compared people's SSI scores over time with their performance on the leaderboard, and they found some interesting things. So the first thing is they found that those who use LinkedIn well are 5 times, so 500% more likely to get engagement with a prospect, to actually go and get the appointment. So if you want to increase your chances of getting appointments with people, use LinkedIn well. The next thing they found was that those that use LinkedIn well built 45% more sales pipelines. So they could take control of building sales pipeline rather than being dependent on inbound leads. They could do their research, they could engage in context with people and engineer warm introductions rather than making cold calls. And the last thing is that C9 found that those people were 51% more likely. So this is probability, it's not luck or hope, it's probability, 51% more likely to actually make their sales target. So really important. So the first thing was salespeople need to become micro marketers to modernize the way they sell. The second thing is, as an organization, this is an organizational thing now, is we need to think about using customer experience as the single biggest factor in creating competitive differentiation. This stat from Gartner Research says that this year in 2016, nearly 90% of chief marketing officers are going to be focused on customer experience as their biggest point of difference. So, what that really means is they're focused on the how we sell instead of the what we sell. So they recognize that we've all got lots of competition out there, or most of us do have other competition out there that looks pretty much the same in the eyes of our buyer. We may think we're better, but buyers go, well, you look pretty much the same to me. But the way that you do business is transformational. And I just want to give you a couple of examples of that. Virgin to me is amazing. Virgin is a low price airline, and they would say that they deliver an amazingly good quality of service. My view is that they've redefined the word quality around the word attitude. So the truth with Virgin is you don't get a bigger, nicer seat, you don't get nice food on the plane, you don't get a lot of these other things that people would say define quality. What they do is they give you a great attitude from every single person that you engage with that works for them. So they've defined quality as attitude. It cost them nothing to do it. It was just how they decided to create customer experience. And it's been an amazingly successful strategy. And from Richard Branson all of the way down, they built a culture around having a great attitude in all of the people. If you have a look at Apple, I converted away from Microsoft to Apple myself about 4 years ago. When I first started buying Apple, I did my normal thing of caring about, am I getting a good deal? Where can I get a bit of a discount? I now just walk into an Apple store and buy things. I don't care. The experience they give me in the store, online, when I've had an issue, which is very rare, I've gone online. The customer experience they deliver for me online is really strong. On a couple of occasions, I've clicked the button that said, would you like someone to call you? And I swear this is true, within 60 seconds, the phone's rung and someone's on the phone to me resolving my problem. Amazing customer experience. Now, I know I pay for it because their products are far more expensive than other ones out there, but I'm happy to pay because I get a great level of service. If you think about Tesla, Tesla is absolutely amazing. I don't know whether anybody watched online the live launch of the new Tesla 3, which was just, I think, about 4 days ago. But in just 3 days, about 3.5 days, they've taken approximately 300,000 orders where people have put $1,000 down. And this is the amazing thing. Almost all of those sales didn't involve a salesperson. So if you look at the traditional car selling model, you've got to go into a dealer to be able to place your order. They basically got an online store. You can see a screenshot of it here where people would just pay their $1,000 and jump in line. Now, when you consider that this car won't be shipping until the end of 2017, they haven't nailed down all of the specs. People are still handing over their money and jumping in line, 300,000 people. And the reason they're doing it is because they trust Elon Musk, they trust the Tesla brand, and Tesla is creating an exclusive, super cool customer experience that people want to be part of. So think about customer experience as the way of avoiding commoditization, as the way of holding up margins, as a way of driving sales, and map sales people into that customer experience only where it's necessary. And then the last thing is integrate your methodology, process, and technology for sales enablement. So what I really mean by that is that if you're in complex business-to-business selling, for example, you'll need to have a strategy to drive why you execute the tactics that you do, who you need to get to, and how you're going to go and engage. And then once you're engaged, you'll need a process for doing discovery and qualification and doing pricing, demonstrating, contracting with people. And you need to apply technology to drive that all really well. Just to give you another example of this, and because this webinar is sponsored by Citrix, but even the process of getting contracts out to people and making it easy for them to go ahead, you don't need to send a salesperson out to close somebody. You don't need to pay a courier and wait days and days for business to actually get committed to and executed. Citrix has got technology where you can sign online with contracts and they make the process incredibly easy. Citrix make it possible for you to get eyeball to eyeball with somebody, even if they're in another city or on another continent, by doing that online. So the ability to do cost-effective, high-quality video conferencing, the ability to do demonstrations, to share screens without flying teams interstate to try and do some kind of software demo or technology demonstration. Again, Citrix has got the technology that doesn't just drive cost out. The thing that it does is it enables you to respond far more rapidly. One of the things that we know in selling is the person who responds the earliest and then provides insight and value is the one that becomes the emotional favorite and becomes the person that they actually want to do business with. So the whole idea here is that we bring methodology and process together on a technology platform. So a customer relationship management product, a CRM product, would be a part of this. You need a single source of the truth about your customer and all of the interactions, and then you create a mashup of other technologies. You integrate things like LinkedIn, you use Citrix's products, you find a way to create great customer experience and use technology to do it. But what you want to do is embed your sales methodology and process inside CRM so that sales management can coach salespeople and so that sales and marketing to work together. So I mentioned earlier that, for example, Taz have a product called Dealmaker that integrates well with Salesforce. My own sales methodology, RSVP selling, has been integrated to Sugar CRM, for example, but it brings it all together so that you can see the org charts, the power base, the people, you can qualify the opportunity, do discovery, and it's all in one place. So you want to find ways to bring technology together to drive efficiency and drive out cost of the organization. And at the bottom of this screen, is that stat that if you respond in 1 hour, it results in 60 times greater probability of engaging rather than waiting 24 hours. It amazes me how organizations get this so wrong. I recently bought myself a new car as an example of this, and I did not deal with a salesperson to buy it. I did the whole thing online and with email. The only conversation I had with a salesperson was at the end of the process when they phoned me and asked me for my credit card details, so that they could take my $1,000 deposit. But in that process, I found a website that basically enables people to get a car at wholesale, and they run an auction to car dealers to get you a great price. So I filled in their form on their website, submitted it, got a confirmation that it had been submitted, and then no follow-up. Filled the form in again 4 days later, same thing, no follow-up. I then phoned them, and I in business hours, and I got through to a voicemail box where I left a message. no returned call. I phoned again and got to talk to someone, and that salesperson got very indignant with me when I started to complain about the process. And I said, look, the reason I'm complaining and letting you know this is I don't want to give you all the same information again. I filled it in twice already. Can you find that information so I don't have to go through it again? He said he had it in front of him. And then within about 15 seconds, he's asking me information that I'd already put in on their website. So, this is an example of a business that's got a vision for supporting customer experience and using people and online to execute, but they didn't execute well. They had things falling through the cracks. So in summary, right, we want salespeople to become micro-marketers with strong personal brands, and they need to lead with insight and truly create value in the conversations. They need to elevate the way that they sell is the key message here in point 1. So salespeople need to elevate the way that they operate. Get into that top right-hand quadrant as a consultative, trusted advisor is a cliche, I know, but to take a consultative approach to helping the clients. The second thing is that organizations need to recognize that the way they sell is more important than what they sell. So that's true for salespeople too, but it's true for the whole organization. And they need to invest heavily in building excellent customer experience like Virgin, like Apple, like Tesla as examples, as a way of competitively differentiating to turn their customers into market advocates. Our customers, the smartest organizations have their customers working as their salespeople. That's one of the ways they can have less salespeople they're paying on their payroll, because they overall have more salespeople with customer advocates. And the last thing is, take a good hard look at where you're investing your money. The lazy thing to do is to just throw money at more salespeople. The difficult but smart thing to do is to look at buyer journey, align to it really well, and work out how you can use technology to engage with your buyers the way that you want to provide them content at every single step of their journey, to be able to give them confidence that they can progress to that next step, and then to help them to execute and transact with you in a way that's easy and convenient for them, and bring it all together, methodology, process, and technology together. So, with that, we'd like to throw this open for questions, and I'll just mute my microphone and hand over to Neil.
Okay, great. Many thanks, Tony. I think the 3 pillars that you put forth actually are really great takeaways from your overall presentation, and are really interesting points in terms of where I suppose SMBs are finding themselves at the moment. So certainly indicative in the poll answers that we got through earlier, and when you consider that they of course don't have the same level of resources as perhaps their larger counterparts. I'd like to thank you for your time today, Tony. The presentation I found really interesting, especially around those 3 pillars. I think it's something that a lot of small businesses are definitely feeling in the marketplace at the moment. So thanks again. And of course, if any of you'd like to reach out to Tony, please feel free to do so. The information on your screen now, and apologies for that little red squiggly line that seems to have popped up on the screen. Damn spell check. So thanks again. And with that, of course, I'd like to thank you all for attending and your involvement in today's event.
Thanks, Tanil. It was really good to be on the call, everybody. Hey, just on that as well, if you visit my website, rsvpselling.com, there's a tab there around modernized selling, which talks about social selling, and on that page, that white paper I just talked about is there, and you could download it there as well. So go to rsvpselling.com, click on the modernized selling tab, and that'll have a white paper there that you can download. So I really enjoyed speaking with you all today. Thanks so much, Tanil, and thanks to Citrix.